We are live on LinkedIn and YouTube. Our topic today is subsidies for electricity generation, a terrible plan for the planet. And with us, two great professionals, Ronald Stein, you can read on screen, Senior Policy and Co-author of Pulitzer Prize nominated book, and Professor Cleveland Jones, researcher, member of advisory boards, and in geopolitics and strategies, he's a great guy. Welcome, gentlemen.
Nice to be with you, Cabana.
Glad to be back.
Let me start showing a chart that's it's here that shows up the subsidies for fossil fuels in 2022. Fossil fuels were larger than renewable energy subsidies. And the question, Ronald, please starting with you, should renewable energy subsidies end and fossil fuels maybe long term?
No, because they do different things. Renewables only generate electricity, where fossil fuels, especially oil, produces all the oil derivatives and accounts for all the products in our daily lives. So it does a lot more. Renewables can't make insulation and plastic and lipstick. They can't make anything. They just generate electricity. In fact, when you get down to the basics, all the ways we have to generate electricity, coal, natural gas, wind, solar, nuclear, hydro, they existed after oil. Because all the parts to make electricity, insulation, wire, computers, doors,
yeah, but 15% of the oil production only 15. 85% is for fuels, liquid fuels.
And wind and solar can't make any fuels.
Yeah, you are right. But that's the reason enough to do not subsidize.
But in your chart, you're comparing apples to oranges. They don't do the same thing.
Yeah, I know that there are different things.
Cabana, let me interject something here. I think there's two important concepts here. One is the concept of subsidies, which regardless of what kind and what they do, subsidies are implemented to achieve certain policies that governments see as desirable. So, if you want to achieve something, subsidies might help you get there, but they do create distortions. Even if, as Ron says, there are different kinds of subsidies for different kinds of things, but the fundamentals of subsidies are indeed quite worrisome. And I think that one of the things that we have to get back to is basics. How are we going to run an economy? If we have, as we do, high subsidies for fossil fuels, it's certainly a lot easier from a political point of view to just add subsidies for something else like renewables rather than reduce subsidies for fossil fuels. And then they'll come up with another thing and they'll invent more subsidies for fusion or whatever else.
But what are the functions? What are the objectives of subsidies?
Well, let me just say this. In terms of renewables, I understand that the objectives were to bring them into the energy mix. A wrong objective, because I think that we should focus on technologies being developed. That's what R&D funding is for. You show how fusion works, and then you let private companies take it from there. They can raise capital if the technology is good. So, these kinds of subsidies are indeed, I think, harmful to the economy. Now, the subsidies that Ron is talking about for the oil and gas industry, I don't agree with in particular, but I also think that you cannot, given the size, you cannot change things, 1 year, change everything. That's very disruptive for the economy. Even the subsidies for renewables would probably have to be phased out rather than, stomped out all at once. But it is something that we have to think about, because think of the subsidies that are not directly for fuels. There's subsidies that are for cars and roads that
Yeah,
support
understand.
car
Great.
transportation.
Yeah. Ronald wanted to make a
Yes, the thing about fossil fuels is the products benefit all 8 billion people on this planet, whereas the subsidies for renewables is only by the wealthy countries that can afford subsidies. You have to understand that 80% of the people on this planet, which is more than 6 billion people, they're living on less than $10 a day. They can't subsidize themselves out of a paper bag. They'll never have wind turbines and solar panels because they can't subsidize them.
Your point is very interesting. So subsidized renewables subsidize wealthy people.
Yes.
Okay, I agree that that's a very important distinction.
Good point.
Remember, countries like Venezuela and many others, they have cheapest gasoline in the world and so on. Yeah, it's a subsidy. But you also have to say, is that the way to go? In Africa, you could argue, well, if you didn't subsidize natural gas for stoves, for example, they would be cooking with sticks and animal dung, which is true. So there is a reason, for example, to subsidize fuels, even fossil fuels, as alternatives from a social, from a health,
Yeah.
from that standpoint, because you're providing the population with a means to rise out of energy poverty.
You both wrote an article about this issue. You have this. Oh,
Yeah.
great. Oh, great pictures. Yeah, perfect. So the idea, Ronald and Cleveland, is that energy poverty is influencing energy policies in the world.
I think it's a very important reason and for implementing subsidies, including for fossil fuels in many countries. Now, as Ron said, once you start getting out of the energy poverty and you get, beyond the miserable level, and you get maybe to just poverty or low income, then you have to rethink things, because then an economy gets to the point where they could maybe benefit from developing industry and so on.
Yeah, Ronald. Sorry again, the same point. Sorry, being let's see repetitive in this, but the reason to have petrochemical products from oil, this is substantive enough to have subsidies for oil. This is a good point.
Well, let's take a look at the benefits of what we're getting from crude oil,
Yeah.
because the world populated from 1 billion to 8 billion in less than 200 years. After oil, it was the products. We now have hospitals, we've got transportation, we've got sanitation, medical equipment, appliances. This stuff didn't exist a couple hundred years ago. And the wealthy countries are benefiting from all that. The thing about subsidizing and trying to pick another winner of renewables, you have to take a look at something that no one's really looking at. Another thing is the planet's Earth's resources. Today we're extracting from planet Earth. It's been here for 4 billion years, and we're extracting oil and coal and natural gas at alarming rates. Who knows how much is left? It might be 100 years, 500 years, 5,000 years, but definitely the planet's going to be here with or without the three of us. and now you're taking a look at the Earth's resources to support renewables, wind and solar and EV batteries, the lithium, the cobalt, the nickel. I mean, all these exotic metals, it hasn't been proven that there's more of that than there is of oil. And you're basically trying to subsidize renewables when we may run out of them resources in less time than oil. Either case, planet Earth has limited resources.
Cavagna, see, I think it's very instructive to understand that distinction between the economic, theoretical effects of for example, tariffs and subsidies. They all have very negative effects, and practical effects. Because, for example, I wanted to mention here that the Texas Railroad Commissioner, Wayne Christian, just published an article on February 25th. and he says it's time to end energy subsidies. And of course, he's talking about renewables. But down the line, he says, oh, any subsidies are wrong and they cause distortions in the economy and so on. And I think he just kind of sidesteps your slide where it is clear that fossil fuels also are receiving what I consider excessive subsidies. And, in particular, where in the world. I think the subsidies that are most worrisome are not in Africa and maybe some Latin American countries, Southeast Asian countries that do have subsidies for fossil fuels for the reasons that I mentioned, maybe supporting social goals. The subsidies that I do consider most worrisome are exactly in the United States, that is a wealthy country and that continues to subsidize fossil fuels in not directly but indirectly in infrastructure, all focused on individual automobile transportation as opposed to mass transit, which if it were to receive subsidies would indeed use electricity,
You,
which
you,
would
you,
justify the renewables
yeah,
that we may not be able to completely use now.
because Ronald and Cleveland, so the U.S. government is making some choice focusing on fossil fuels, and does it mean that renewables are dead?
No,
Well,
no.
with Trump in the White House, I think renewables are dying. I wouldn't say they're
Uh,
dead, but they're
Very
not going to
political, yeah.
very political. But
But it's something that not even Trump or Western Europe, they couldn't, even if they wanted to, they couldn't stop renewables, because what drives any fundamental major trend, like the mega trends that we used to talk about, are economics. And finally, pricing for some of these energies. You know that I'm forecasting that wind will die by itself. Trump doesn't need to kill it, but if it does, but solar is at the point where it starts competing with coal generation. At that point, you have to say, hey, subsidies for coal don't make sense, much less for other things, if there are possibility to
Yeah,
produce electricity with solar.
yeah.
well,
Ronald, there is a
interesting point.
contradiction. Sure, sure, sure.
Interesting point. Cleveland is 100% correct. There's no silver bullet answers to the situation. And I know here in the United States, by 2040, I think we're closing about 228
Yeah.
coal-fired power plants. Now, these are power plants that have generated, now they're all old. They're like 50 years old.
Yeah.
And so we're eliminating continuous, uninterruptible electricity generation. And it's got to be replaced by newer technology, be it solar, be it nuclear, but it's a changing world.
Yeah.
But with that much power coming offline by 2040, that's going to be major. And, right now, wind and solar is being intermittent electricity, doesn't quite
Big
fill.
challenge.
Big challenge.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. One thing is say, okay, you get electricity, but you don't get the same electricity. You get intermittent electricity. And so you also need storage, maybe not battery storage because at large scale,
Or natural gas as a
that's
continuous.
probably not going to be economical. But you have other means of providing some kind of storage or balancing, even with artificial intelligence and so on. But the key is
But
that
artificial
even if
intelligence, sorry, do not create energy. It's only in the efficiency zone. Artificial intelligence. So the creation of energy is from renewables or fossil fuels.
yeah, what we talk about is useful energy. What do people actually use or industry uses? Industry uses heat, but it also uses electricity. Transportation mostly uses fuels. If we have some measure of that use converted to electricity by mass transit, trains, and all that kind of stuff, it is feasible to convert some of that, not 100%. And I think that's one of the problems of this whole conversation in other platforms demonizing fossil fuels is no solution. You can't
Yeah,
demonize. And I don't think you should demonize renewables either. I don't think, it's a good idea for Trump to say, hey, let's cancel
yeah,
wind. It'll die by itself.
yeah,
Solar will survive. Maybe some
yeah.
biofuels
Okay.
will reach out there.
Yeah, but the
But
point
one
is the
thing, when you're
following.
talking about energy, energy really is broken down to three subjects. You got products, you
Products.
got fuels, and you got electricity.
Yeah,
And to support the 8 billion on this planet,
Yeah.
we want the products because we're a materialistic society. We have heavy transportation. I know here in California, we consume the most aviation fuel in the entire country because we got 9 international airports, 41 military airports,
yeah.
consuming a lot of aviation fuel. So the fuel's got to be there. Renewables can't make fuel. So, like I say, it's a mix. It's going to be a challenge to make it all
But
work.
Ronald, there is a contradiction here because the U.S. is saying that do not want more renewables, only the continuous plants. But at the same time, is asking to Ukraine to offer their minerals for
Yeah.
what?
Well, right now, with China controlling all the exotic minerals and metals, for whatever green we go to, you don't want them to have control. You want to have control here. Just Newsom, I mean, Trump wants to get the minerals and metals in the United States. He wants to drill for oil. He wants to be energy independent of foreign countries.
The point of the independence, yeah.
But Cavalier, remember, I'm a strong proponent that what we should seek is energy security. Independence, which is what Ron is talking about, and I think Trump is looking at it more as independence, is a very expensive proposition. If you really want independence, that is expensive. That creates a lot of changes, fundamental changes in the supply and the demand chains and so on.
Control, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe it's really much more feasible, and maybe it'll end up being like that. That what you do is diversify some of the sources, diversify some of the uses, because that's good for the economy. It's not ideological. That's safety. That's putting not all your eggs in one basket. Like Ron says, California has tremendous fuel demand, and it has to import that because it's not even connected to the sources in the rest of the U.S. It can't take fuel from Texas. So it's a real contradiction. That is not security.
Let's move a little bit to the environmental and labor concerns that are written in your article related to risks to the population, environmental and labor concerns associated with extracting essential minerals. Is
Well, yeah,
it
I've
really
written about that
true?
quite often
Or,
because most of the exotic minerals and metals supporting the green movement are coming from developing countries that have no labor controls, no environmental controls. We're exploiting people with yellow, brown, and black skin. The environmental degradation is atrocious, but that's okay. We're going green.
yeah, but not in Ukraine, for instance.
Well, Ukraine's going nowhere with those, so it doesn't matter.
Ah,
But look, I think Ron is right. We have to be less cynical because we have whatever we do, we have to recognize the pros and cons, and we have to assume the responsibility for those consequences. If we decide to go in a route that requires cobalt mined by children in Africa and so on,
yeah,
we
okay.
have to say it's so important that it's okay for these kids to give up their lives. And very few people would actually.
But you see a big difference between extracting minerals and the environmental problems with hydrocarbon and coal production. It's not equivalent.
Well, I certainly think that the environmental footprint of fossil fuels ranges all the way from coal, which can be very bad and very significant. It's not CO2 for what greenhouse gases. It's real pollution, and if you try to tackle that, it's very expensive, and then coal isn't cheap anymore. And it goes all the way to oil, which can also be heavy oil and bad when you burn it and so on, to natural gas, which is relatively clean. So many articles have already shown that if the U.S. were to convert most of their coal and most of their other fuels to natural gas, they would meet all of the environmental targets for clean energy all at once because natural gas would do it. We have to recognize natural gas is clean, and in a transition to whatever we want in
And methane
2030, it's key.
methane is not a problem.
No,
Methane.
it's really in the U.S. and in the developed countries that you have to say what you want and at what cost. If you want clean energy, you can have it. You can have it with natural gas. You can complement that with some other
But
renewables.
but the environmental impacts of oil production exploration is something huge. It's not something simple.
No,
It's
Cabana,
pretty limited.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm an
Ronald?
environmentalist. You know that. I put my priorities way up there. Preservation of biodiversity and natural habitats, clean water, oceans, that kind of thing. When we start talking about, greenhouse gases and so on, yes, I can even accept that we may have ongoing climate changes. They're not dramatic as they're made out to be, and they're also not as imminent as some of these other environmental problems. So fossil fuels, like I said, range in environmental footprint. Let's use the ones that are less harmful. And I do agree that when possible, we should convert coal plants to natural gas or to whatever else. But we don't cut off natural gas.
Yeah,
We don't say
let's
we won't build any more gas plants.
let's summarize this point, Ronald, because uh, in the final terms, fossil fuels are better or worse in terms of environmental impacts comparing to renewables.
Well, let's take a look at if you get rid of fossil fuels,
Yeah,
then that's a different story.
yeah,
Because,
smart
you know,
answer.
we're mandating and subsidizing to get renewables. But if you really want to get rid of crude oil, mandate people stop using the products, stop using the fuels, limit the amount of flights. You'll basically do that, but government's not going to do that. Stop going to the hospital, close the hospitals. And,
Yeah,
you
I
know,
think it's also a question of demand side and supply side. We're so focused on the supply side, but just as with drugs, it's very important to close the demand side because it's been proven many times with many products all over the world throughout the ages. You don't control something by controlling the supply because that just as long as you have the demand, that a new channel opens up, a new supply country opens up. That is a very key distinction. If you're trying to get to a clean planet by trying to get rid of fossil fuels, it's not going to work. What you might try to do is try to subsidize some research and development so that you can see how you can rearrange the world, demand, and so on. That's going to take time. It's
Yeah,
not going to be quick, and it's going to be expensive.
well, the benefits of fossil fuels is we now have 8 billion people on the planet. It's growing. We
Yeah.
can adapt to almost any weather change. If it's cold, turn the heater on. If it's hot, turn the air conditioner on. But on the other hand, if you get rid of fossil fuels, we're going to lose billions of people. Think of the world without the hospitals, without the transportation, and all the sanitation systems we have. It's a different world. You're comparing apples and oranges.
Well, it's just impossible. I mean, obviously, he's pointing to a ludicrous situation. You can't get rid of hospitals because you can't mandate the end of fossil fuels. What you might try to do is, as I said, some supply shifting to fuels that are slightly less polluting. And I mean pollution, like in China, millions of people dying every year because of soot and lung disease. Just as in Africa, millions of people die from breathing indoor smoke from wood and dung stoves. That is a crisis.
so could we conclude that the challenge that we have in the world are replace 15% of oil that goes to petrochemical products and replace 85% of oil that goes to heavy logistics. This is the challenges we have.
If you call that a challenge, I say it's an impossible challenge. We have to
Impossible
be more
challenge.
realistic.
Wow.
Well, Armando, we've had 200 years to replace fossil fuels. You know, I was interviewed on a New York TV station recently, and the first question to me was, "Hey, Ron, we understand you're pro-oil." I said, "Time out. I'm not pro-oil. I'm pro the products we get from oil. If we get the products from some other source, I'm all for it." Same thing with
Now,
fuel. If
that's
we
a very
get,
important point. Yeah,
if we
Ron
get the fuels,
Yeah.
is right on.
Yeah,
You know, the
important point.
products are the keys. And to that end, some of the biofuels actually are a significant part of the answer. Just as in the US, we have significant ethanol production, also in
But
Brazil.
biofuels, the measurement is on liters instead of barrels. It's totally
No,
different
no.
dimensions.
Now we get to million barrel equivalents of biofuels, and
Oh,
this
yeah.
is what people don't understand. It's not 100 million barrels like oil production, but we're still getting to the scale of million
Oh,
barrels a day,
really?
and that is from a very limited source of biofuels, basically sugar cane and maybe some of these other things they do here in Brazil and other countries. But it's now we have a path forward to produce some of the products that Ron is saying are very important
Yeah.
from biofuel, biorefineries, and so on. Are they more
Are there
expensive?
some? Are there
Yeah,
some of them
yeah.
being
They,
made?
oh,
they,
definitely,
they are
yes.
more expensive.
Yeah,
Oh,
we're making
interesting.
some aviation fuel.
Exactly.
Yeah,
SAF.
yes.
It's insignificant now.
Good point.
That's
Good
why
point.
Ron is right. You know, you
But
can't get
but
rid
the
of that and say,
technology is existent. So this
it's,
is a good point.
but we need 5, 10 years for it to really scale up to more significant levels. Right now, you're not going to get those products, plastics,
Yeah.
and all of that kind of stuff
Yeah.
because there isn't a scale. Sure, some companies are going to package their product in plastics produced from biofuels. Whoa, you know, that's
Ro-
small stuff. But in 5 years, 10 years,
Okay.
that can
Okay.
grow. SAF can grow. But
Ro-
these are the limits that we have to be
uh-huh.
realistic about. So forget 50%
Ronald.
and
Yeah.
85. Let's
Yeah.
scale down that to maybe 20 and
Yeah.
40 or whatever.
Yeah.
Let me make
Ronald.
a final point. The article that we wrote, that's, controlling subsidies to determine who's the winner,
Yeah.
renewables, the people making those policy decisions firmly believe that renewables are going to replace fossil fuels. But they can't because they do different things. But they're trying to generate electricity through subsidies, and that is not good for more than 6 or 7 billion people on this planet.
There is a lot of misunderstanding, including by decision makers. That is a major, big problem. And it goes across the board because obviously there's a lot of misunderstanding or misinformation about, critical minerals and what are rare earths and what for. But that's why it's incumbent on all of us to become a little bit more educated about these things because Ron brings out a very basic uh, limitation. It's impossible, some of these aims. And just as that is impossible, it is also impossible to try to, turn biofuels into a giant industry overnight. It's not going to do that. But it's also impossible to say, no, we're not going to rely on biofuels or renewables. They have a place. Right now, it's a small place. And, it may take
Yeah.
decades for that to change very much.
Yes, we are reaching 29, almost 30 minutes. That is
Okay.
our target for this kind of conversation with two clever people, fantastic ones. I have a last question. Yeah, sure.
You have to
Sure.
remember, China, Asia is building 88 new refineries. So we can shut down all the refineries around the world, and China will be providing our products and our fuels. They recognize that's the way it's
Good
going to be.
point.
Yeah, they're
Very
also
good.
building nuclear power plants, which are also the way to go. So the West in general has had a dismal history of decisions as to where to go Germany closing down its nuclear power plants. Give me a break.
But the atmosphere is one only, so there is no way. My last question, please. California is really thinking of separating from the U.S., Ronald?
We separated decades ago.
Very good.
When you see the press, Newsom's comments and Trump's comments are totally different. So I want to see when they get together and meet, if it's going to be a discussion or a battle.
They live in the same country.
I
No,
think
the
they do.
sparks flying can drive a lot of energy.
That's a good one.
Very good.
Cleveland Jones, Ronald Stein, thank you so much. It was fantastic conversation.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Take care.
Thank you. Take care.